Last fall, I dug a single square foot out of my raised bed, set it on a tarp, and counted the worms. Three. After 20 years of gardening that same plot, three worms in a square foot. Then I tried something an Amish gardener showed me in Lancaster County. And when I dug that same spot the next spring, I counted 31. Same bed, same soil, same square foot. The difference was one buried practice these families have used for generations, and it cost me nothing. Most gardeners try to add worms. The Amish don't add worms. They make the soil call them in. I am going to walk you through exactly how they do it. Stay with me to the end because I will show you the one kitchen scrap they bury that worms will travel feet through the soil to reach. Three worms in the fall, 31 the next spring, same square foot, same bed, lifted onto the same tarp and counted by hand in my test bed by the deck. I did not add a single worm to that soil. What I changed was the conditions, and the worms came on their own. That is the whole idea, and most gardeners get it backwards. They buy a box of worms and dump them on top of soil that cannot hold them. They rototill every spring and shred the burrows the worms already built. And down here in the foothills, my native soil sits at a pH of 5.4, far too acidic for worms to settle and breed. So they leave, or they die, and the gardener buys another box. The Amish in Lancaster County have never done it that way. These families have buried their soil's food for generations, and the worms migrate toward it. Worms navigate by scent, by moisture, and by the carbon dioxide gradient rising off decomposing organic matter. You do not add worms. You make the soil call them in. That is what the Amish gardener showed me, and it cost me nothing. I am going to walk you through this in 5 steps. Step 1, stop disturbing the soil. Step 2, bury the larder. That is the one practice that did the heavy lifting. Step 3, fix your pH and supply calcium. Step 4, mulch and hold the moisture. And step 5, keep the feeding rhythm through the seasons. Stay with me to the end because after those 5 steps, I will show you the one kitchen scrapworms will travel feet through the soil to reach. It is sitting in your kitchen right now and it costs you nothing. Step 1. Stop disturbing the soil. For the first 15 years I gardened that plot. I turned my beds every spring with a tiller because that is what I was taught. I thought I was loosening things up, mixing in air, giving the roots room. What I was actually doing was tearing the worm city apart every single April. Here is the science. A nightcrawler does not live in the top 2 inches. It builds a permanent vertical burrow that can run 3, 4, even 5 feet straight down, and it uses that same tunnel for its whole life. It comes up at night to feed, pulls leaf litter down, and retreats. When you run a tiller through that bed, you slice every one of those tunnels into pieces. The worms that survive have to start over, and most of them do not bother, they leave. So step 1 is to stop. Quit tilling. Feed the bed from the top instead. Lay your compost and amendments on the surface and let the worms pull it down for you, which is exactly what they evolved to do. The failure mode here is impatience. People feel like they have to dig to make something happen, and every time they dig deep, they reset the clock. Resist it. The win is that within 1 season, those vertical burrows stay intact, and an intact burrow network is the foundation everything else sits on. You cannot call worms into a bed you destroy every spring. Step 2, bury the larder. This is the one practice the Amish gardener in Lancaster County showed me. And this is the one that did the heavy lifting on my count. Most gardeners feed the surface and hope. The Amish feed underground on purpose where the worms already live. Here is how you do it. Cut a trench down the length of your bed, 8 to 10 inches deep and 6 to 8 inches wide. Pull that soil off to the side on a tarp. Then fill the bottom of that trench with aged horse or cow manure mixed with chopped leaves and plant scraps from the garden. Pack it in. Then take the soil you set aside and backfill 4 to 6 inches over the top of it so the food is buried, sealed under a blanket of earth. Space these trenches every 3 to 4 feet across the bed. That is it. You have built a buried pantry. The worms will travel to reach. In Lancaster County, those families have composted horse and cow manure over the winter for generations, and in spring they work it into the ground rather than spreading it on top where it dries out and gasses off into the air. The manure underground stays moist, stays cool, and breaks down slow and steady. That slow breakdown is the engine. As the buried organic matter decomposes, it throws off carbon dioxide and a strong, earthy scent, and that gradient rises up through the soil. Worms read that gradient like a trail. They follow the carbon dioxide, they follow the moisture, and they migrate horizontally and vertically toward the source. You are not dumping worms on top and praying they stay. You are building the thing they were already searching for and letting them come to it. The failure mode is burying the food too shallow. If you only cover it with an inch or two, the surface dries out, the scent escapes too fast, and you draw rodents instead of worms. Get it down under 4 to 6 inches of soil. The wind shows up faster than you would expect. In my own test bed, I cut these trenches in the fall, and when I lifted a shovelful, near one of them a few weeks later, the manure layer was already laced with worms threading through it. They had relocated into the bed on their own. Nobody added them. The soil called them in. Now, I want to be honest with you about why this works the way it does, because the mechanism is the whole point. A worm is a simple animal with a powerful nose, in a manner of speaking. It cannot see, but it senses chemical and moisture gradients through its skin with remarkable precision. When you concentrate a rich, wet, slowly decomposing food source 8 inches down and seal it under soil, you create a stable, long-lasting plume that does not blow away on the first dry afternoon. A surface pile of manure loses its moisture and its scent within days. A buried trench holds both for weeks. That is the difference between a snack that is gone before the worms arrive and a buried larder that keeps drawing them in over the entire season. The Amish figured this out long before anybody was measuring carbon dioxide gradients in a lab. They just watched their soil, kept their manure aging through the winter, and worked it under in the spring because the results spoke for themselves, generation after generation. A word on the manure itself, because this matters more than people think. It has to be aged. The Lancaster County families do not take it fresh from the barn and bury it the same week. They let it sit and compost down through the cold months. So by planting season, it has cooled off and mellowed. I will come back to why fresh manure is a mistake later on. But for now, understand that the material going into your trench should be dark, crumbly, and earthy smelling, not hot and sharp. Mix it roughly half and half with chopped leaves and spent plant material so you have a blend of fast-feeding nitrogen and slower carbon. That blend is what keeps the trench working over weeks instead of burning out in a few days. Once that buried larder is in place and the worms have started moving toward it, you have the second piece locked in. The next thing you have to fix is the soil itself, because you can bury all the food in the world and the worms still will not stay if the chemistry is wrong. Step 3, correct the pH and give the worms calcium. This is the step most people skip entirely, and it is the reason their worms move in and then disappear by midsummer. My native mountain clay sits at a pH of 5.4. That is sour, acidic soil, and worms do not breed in it. They tolerate it for a while if there is food, but they will not multiply. What you want is a pH somewhere between 6.0 and 7.0, near neutral. To move my test bed from 5.4 up toward 6.5, I worked in garden lime at roughly 5 pounds per 100 square feet, which raises the pH about half a point. Lime moves slowly, so I put it down in the fall and let the winter rain carry it in. Here is the part most gardeners miss. Worms need calcium for their own bodies. They have a structure called a calciferous gland. What that means in plain language is worms use calcium to balance the acid in their gut so they can digest the soil they eat. No calcium, no breeding. So, along with the lime, I crush eggshells fine and scatter them into the trench. The Amish gardeners in Lancaster County have done this for generations without ever knowing the word calciferous. They just knew their ground sweetened with ash and shell, and the worms came. Get this step right, and you have soil worms can not only tolerate but reproduce in. That is the difference between a population that visits and one that stays. Step 4. Blanket the bed with mulch and hold the moisture steady. A worm breathes through its skin. It has no lungs. That skin has to stay damp, or the worm cannot pull oxygen, which is why you find them dead on the sidewalk after a hard rain drives them up, and the sun dries them out. So I lay down 3 to 4 inches of straw or shredded leaves across the whole bed. That mulch does 3 jobs at once. It holds moisture, it keeps the surface cool and dark, and it slowly feeds the soil from the top down. The moisture target I aim for is what I call wrung-out sponge. Squeeze a handful of soil and it should hold together and feel damp, but no water should drip out. That is roughly 50% moisture, and it is the sweet spot. Worms also have a temperature they prefer. Once the soil sits between about 50 and 60 degrees under that mulch, they come right up near the surface to feed. I check it with my soil thermometer before I expect to see much activity. Pull back the mulch on a cool, damp morning and you will find them working in the top 2 inches right where you want them. Skip the mulch and let that surface bake, and they retreat 3 feet down and you would swear they left. They did not. They just went where it was livable. Step 5, keep the feeding rhythm going. This is the piece that turned my count from a one-time bump into a climbing number, and it is the heart of the Amish cycle. A buried trench is not a one and done. The worms eat through it, and once it is gone, they will move on looking for the next meal. So during the growing season, I replenish the trenches every 4 to 6 weeks, and I rotate the feeding spots so I'm not digging the same line twice and disturbing the colony I just built. Then in the fall, I load up. I dig deeper, fill heavier with that aged manure and leaf blend, and bury it before the cold sets in. Under 3 or 4 inches of mulch, the soil stays workable long after the air turns cold, and the worms keep feeding and breeding through the winter while everything above ground looks dead. That is exactly why my count jumped from fall to spring. I fed them in October, they worked all winter under the blanket, and by the time I lifted that square foot in spring, the population had multiplied. The Lancaster County families have run this same seasonal loop for generations. Feed in fall, hold through winter, harvest the worms' work in spring. The result of getting this rhythm right is a soil that gets richer every single season instead of starting over each year. Now, before we keep going, I want to share something with you. If what I am walking you through is making sense, and you're starting to see that attracting worms is really a soil chemistry problem, pH, calcium, organic matter, then I want to point you to the full system. I put it in a book called Steve's 30-Day Maximum Yield Protocol. Chapter 3 is the Soil Reset chapter, and it walks through pH adjustment rates, organic matter targets, and how to judge compost quality with diagrams that lay it out clearly. It is $17 at stevesgardenbooks.com. This is for the gardener who is tired of guessing and ready to start measuring. If you're watching on your television, grab your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. Take your time finding it. I will be right here. If you are on a phone or laptop, the link is in the description. All right, let us keep going. Let me save you the mistakes I made because I got every one of these wrong before I got it right. The first mistake is burying the wrong scraps. Meat, dairy, and citrus do not belong in your trench. They go anaerobic and sour. They actually repel worms instead of drawing them in, and worse, they pull rodents into your beds. Stick to plant scraps and aged manure, and nothing from the meat or dairy side of the kitchen. The second mistake is burying fresh, hot manure straight from the barn. I learned this the hard way. Fresh manure is loaded with ammonia, and it heats up as it breaks down, and that combination will drive your worms off or kill them outright. The fix is patience. Age your manure 3 to 6 months until it is cool, dark, and crumbly before it ever touches the trench. That is why the Lancaster County families let their manure sit and compost through the winter before it goes near a planting bed. The third mistake is letting the bed dry out. I have watched a thriving worm count crash in 2 weeks of summer heat because I let the mulch thin out and the soil bake. When the soil dries, the worms either flee deep or go dormant and your surface activity vanishes. Keep the mulch topped up at that 3 to 4 inch depth and keep the soil at wrung sponge moisture and you will not lose them. None of these are complicated. They are the small things that quietly undo all the good work in the other steps, and once you stop making them, the whole system holds together. Now for the one I promised you at the start. I told you I would show you the 1 kitchen scrap worms will travel feet through the soil to reach. And here it is, a cantaloupe rind, a melon rind, the thing most people toss in the trash on a summer afternoon. Here is how you use it. Take the rind after you have eaten the melon and bury it hollow side down 3 to 4 inches deep, about one rind for every 2 to 3 square feet of bed. Then wait 5 to 7 days and lift it. The first time I did this in my test bed, I marked the spot, came back a week later, and found dozens of worms massed underneath a single rind, far more than the surrounding soil should have held. Here is the science behind why it works. A cantaloupe rind is high in sugar, and it is almost entirely water. That combination breaks down fast, and as it decomposes, it throws off a strong scent and releases carbon dioxide and moisture into the surrounding soil. Worms navigate by exactly those signals as they detect the CO2 and moisture gradient, and they crawl toward the source through the soil. The rind becomes a bait station, and because it is portable, you can move it around the bed wherever you want to concentrate the worms. Then bury a fresh one when the old one is gone. The Amish households treat it as a no-cost scrap from the summer kitchen, nothing wasted. I confirmed it the way I confirm everything. I counted worms under marked rinds in the test bed week after week, and the rinds won every time. All right, before I let you go, I want to connect this back to where we started. This whole video came down to a number. 3 worms in the fall, 31 the next spring, in the same square foot. The only reason I know that, the only reason any of this is more than a feeling, is that I counted and I wrote it down. That measurement discipline is what turns a guess into proof your soil is improving. Chapter 2 of Steve's 30-day maximum yield protocol is the measurement foundation chapter, and it lays out the exact record-keeping system behind my 22 years of data, including the measurement point diagrams that show you what to track and how. It is the same $17 book at stevesgardenbooks.com. If you're on your TV, point your phone at the QR code on screen. If you are on a phone or laptop, the link is waiting in the description. Take a moment to pull it up. I am in no hurry. So that is the whole thing. I went from 3 worms in a single square foot to 31 in that same square foot, and I never bought a worm. I made the conditions that called them in, the way those families in Lancaster County have done for generations. Now, your conditions might be different. Soil chemistry varies, climate varies, what is already living under your beds varies, so do not take my word for it. Cut one trench this season, count the worms before you start, and count them again in spring, and let the number tell you the truth. If you want to go deeper, my next one covers building the compost that fills these trenches in the first place. All right, that is what I have for you today. I will see you in the next one.